All right, we should be live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Upland Hunting webinar we're doing tonight. We're going to be focusing on habitat as well as a little bit of how to find a spot in the state, kind of really looking at that. So, looking at the habitat you're going to be wanting to look for, and then also some common spots you're going to want to get out in. And tonight we're going to be using Riverside. This is a new software for us. So, if this all crashes for some reason, just sit tight. We'll email you a Zoom link. We've had some struggles with Zoom in the past, so we're trying something new tonight. So I appreciate you all being our guinea pigs. We still have a chat in the window, so if you've been to other webinars and this looks a little different, you can still find that chat and you can ask us questions or leave comments through that chat, and we'll respond to those as we get them. So we're just going to kind of go over upland ecology and the habitat that's needed. We'll do a very small amount of regs and just tell you where to find that at, and then we'll go over some land access and some safety as well. So tonight, I'm Jason Buckley, and here is Dan Stevens. And Dan,
Hello,
you got anything
hello.
else you'd like to add before we get started?
I don't think so.
All right, it's going to be a
Yeah.
fast and practical webinar here, I think. So
There
we'll
you go.
knock it
I
out
like it.
and give you some good, helpful information here for everybody who's just getting started in Upland. So yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started. And just a reminder, if you have to take off early, this is going to be recorded. So we'll throw it up on our YouTube channel here probably in the next day or so and send a link out to everybody. So if you have to take off or any tech issues, you will get a full recording of it. But we'll kind of first start off just a quick overview of what are upland birds. You know, we hear this term a lot. And in Illinois, we really have two that are kind of the primary species that people are kind of targeting for harvest. That's going to be the ringneck pheasant as well as the bobwhite quail. Now, you can certainly throw some other species in there like the American woodcock and things, but today we're really going to focus on the pheasant and quail. But I think it's important to really highlight that ring-necked pheasants are not native to Illinois. They are completely basically brought in and were introduced in kind of the late 1800s. The Illinois pheasant population really started to thrive in kind of the, let's say, the mid 1950s. And I'll quick show a graph that really highlights these trends because I think it's pretty stark. But if you look at these trends, you can really see that throughout the 50s, the population was doing really, really well. And then we had kind of the change throughout the 1970s where we saw a really drastic basically increase in agriculture production on kind of a large scale level. And so that's when, human population really started to grow, and we needed to grow more food. And so a lot of the available habitat for pheasant and quail essentially turned into, corn and soybeans. And so we saw that real drastic reduction, both in terms of the population, in terms of harvest, as well as in terms of participation. It's interesting. Hunter effort really tends to follow wildlife population, which kind of makes sense. If there's not a ton of wildlife out there, harvest tends to decrease. That causes participation to decrease a little bit. But there is a little glimmer of hope. If you look at kind of the real tail end of this graph, you start to see a slight uptick in that population. There's been a lot of effort recently focused on putting habitat back on the ground, whether it's private landowners, whether it's on, state managed land, federal managed land, whether it's through some of the various farm bill programs like the Conservation Reserve Program, which is aimed at addressing this and providing more habitat on the ground. So pheasant habitat needs are pretty simple for the most part. They really just need native warm season grasses. And obviously Illinois was very much, I mean, its nickname is the prairie state, right? So Illinois was very much dominated by prairie as well as wet prairie. And ever since we lost a lot of that acreage, the upland population has just essentially fallen, and it's just because that habitat that they require is not there. And so when we use the term native warm season grasses, we'll get into it a little bit later, but you can essentially think of it as your prairie grasses. So when you're out on some of these public land sites or just driving around Illinois and you see really tall prairie looking grasses, that's kind of what we're referring to. And again, we'll kind of dive into that here a little bit more. They also thrive decently well in agricultural areas. The main issue is what our current agriculture looks like. Prior to the 1970s, Illinois was really dominated by this kind of, I like to call it the 40-acre farm. It was very small individual parcels of land that had habitat around the edges. Every single property had, whether it was a hedgerow or a fence row that had, shrubby or just native grasses growing in there. And that allowed pheasants to have the habitat they needed, right? So they had the prairie habitat mixed in with some agriculture. That was great habitat for pheasants. However, again, throughout the 1970s and into current times, we've removed a lot of those hedgerows on the landscape and have these large, kind of incredibly big fields that are just almost a monoculture of ag. That kind of habitat they cannot thrive in. They really need that native, whether it's shrubby, whether it's grassy habitat around the edges.
Yeah, I know Pheasants Forever had a video contest, a movie contest, a short contest a couple of years ago. I remember them, and one of them was highlighting like a frozen pheasant in a cornfield. And it was like a drone footage of a
Oh,
frozen pheasant in a cornfield. It was really disturbing, but it
yeah.
just goes to show like cornfields don't provide that warm season grasses that they need to overwinter in, or else they're going to freeze to death out there. And
Right. And that's one of the big things. I'm glad you brought that up because you may look at a standing cornfield and oh well, it's got the vertical structure that protects them from avian predators above. It's got grain. It's got some food. The issue is, like you just said, once that harvest season comes, that's when they really need that vertical structure of the prairie grasses is through the winter. And so once that's all cut down and harvested, there's it's almost a biological desert out there at that point. Pheasants have a pretty interesting feeding behavior, and it really relies on the habitat and on these native warm season grasses. And we'll show a few pictures, I think, that illustrate this here in a minute. But they are primarily feeding on seeds, on insects, especially during the nesting season. So, late spring into summer, they're really focused on eating insects. And that's really just to get good protein quality. Especially the females, as they're kind of focused on producing and laying eggs. They want to make sure they have a lot of protein, a lot of calcium, and so they're drastically feeding on a lot of insects during that time. But during the fall and winter, very much focused on waste grain. So whether that's they go out and cut a cornfield, there's a little corn scattered, or more commonly, they're just feeding on the seeds that these native warm season grasses and other native plants produce. So pheasants come in a couple different colors. It's quite interesting. I always like to highlight this, especially as we kind of move into the hunting aspect of things. When we're talking about pheasant hunting, in a large part of this conversation today, we're going to be talking about harvesting wild birds. There is a controlled pheasant hunting season that we'll discuss kind of at the very end of this webinar. But when we're talking about the wild season, we are only allowed to legally harvest the males, which we kind of commonly refer to as the roosters. Now, the nice thing is the roosters are very flamboyant, colorful, vibrant, where the females are very drab and cryptic. And again, a lot of that's just due to their breeding behavior. The males need to be showy to show off that they're the dominant male in that area so that the female will reproduce. And the female wants to be very cryptic. She wants to be able to sit and guard that nest and have really strong camouflage against the surrounding habitat. So you can see just by looking at these two animals, a pretty big difference. And it's quite easy to spot once you start spending some time looking at pheasants. You'll know they fly different. The males have a very long tail compared to the females, and it's quite easy to distinguish between the two. But just remember, when we're talking about harvesting wild pheasants in Illinois, we're only discussing harvesting the males or the roosters. The other species that I kind of want to talk a little bit about is the northern bobwhite quail. So this is a really cool species. Sorry. Am I back? I kind of paused there for a second. I want to make sure I'm back. You hear me? Okay, perfect. So the northern bobwhite. So this is a really cool species. For me personally, it holds a very special place in my heart. It's actually the first species that I ever harvested growing up. I grew up in southern Missouri, and we had a little 40-acre farm that, again, was a cattle pasture, but it was surrounded by really good hedgerows. And we had some nice coveys of quail. And so we were able to harvest a few of those. Unfortunately, the quail population is doing even worse than the pheasant population. But this is our primary native upland species in Illinois. So this is the northern bobwhite quail. And it gets its name from its very unique whistle that basically, I'll see if I can. So it's got this very bob white kind of whistle, and that's where that namesake comes. And you're really hearing that whistle again in the spring, throughout the summer, when they're actively calling and actively trying to locate females for the breeding season. They do have another series of calls throughout the fall and winter that we call a covey call. And we'll get to that in just a little bit, but I want to get back here to their overall population trends and just kind of show again how much of this population we've really lost in Illinois. You can see, throughout the 50s and 60s, we were harvesting anywhere from 2 million up to 2.5 million birds. And now you can see we are well below even 50, even 100,000. So there's not a lot of quail left on the landscape. And again, a lot of that is due to habitat. And one thing I like to say about quail habitat is pheasant habitat does not make good quail habitat. Good quail habitat makes great pheasant habitat. And that's because quail, even more so, I mentioned the importance of kind of woody cover and shrubby habitat for pheasants. It's even more important for quail. It is arguably, if it's just a dominant grass field and there's no woody vegetation, there's no shrubs, there's no little trees, chances are quail aren't going to be there. And if they are, they're probably not going to overwinter there. They really need that shrubby, woody vegetation to survive winter. And we'll kind of discuss a little bit of why. But again, they're a very similar habitat to pheasant. So we're talking about big native warm season grass prairies intermixed with a lot of shrubby habitat. They really need that shrubby habitat.
I got a quick question for you, Dan. I don't know if you know the answer to this or not. We didn't pre-plan this, but with honeysuckle being so invasive, is that provide woody habitat? Like if you had a honeysuckle taking over your hedgerow, would that be good for quail, or is that not because it's invasive and for some reason it doesn't?
It's not ideal, and it's mostly not necessarily that it's bush honeysuckle. It's more so due to the way that it grows and the overall structure of it. So if you look at bush honeysuckle and you look underneath it, it's very much just kind of a singular column that then goes up and branches. And it has, and the real bad thing about bush honeysuckle is that it's, I forget the term. I think it's allelopathic. Don't quote me on that term, but essentially what it does is it has toxins that are secreted from the roots and essentially kills any other native vegetation around. So it just becomes basically completely bare soil with kind of a singular column and then some cover. Now, certainly I'm sure it's better than no woody vegetation or no shrub in that area. But certainly not as ideal as a lot of the native shrubs that we have, like a lot of the sumacs and things like those.
Yeah, I'm thinking of some of the state parks we've been to that have been overtaken by honeysuckle. And I mean, we've been to where, it's just almost like hobbit holes of like overgrown honeysuckle that you can actually get into, and it's all bare soil underneath it. And there's nothing growing up, and it's just giant kind of domed honeysuckle bushes and everything else. So yeah, you're totally right.
Exactly. And so a quick just kind of description. We mentioned obviously for pheasants, when we're talking about harvesting wild birds, we're only focused on the roosters. Those are the only legal birds we're able to harvest on a wild pheasant hunt. For bobwhite quail, you can harvest either sex. You will really not be able to tell the difference until you get that bird in the hand. But these pictures do a pretty decent illustration. It's really hard if you just have one or the other in your hand, but when you have both of them, it's a pretty easy comparison to make. But essentially what we're looking at is the patchwork on the side of the face. The males, it's very bright white, where on the females, it's kind of this coppery, kind of what a lot of biologists will call a buffy color. So it's got a little tan, a little khaki to it. It's not near as white and contrasty as the male. But again, for harvest, we don't need to be able to distinguish between male and female on northern bobwhite quail, because you would never be able to shoot a quail otherwise. But what I wanted to really talk about, and I kind of mentioned this term covey a little bit earlier, and so this is a unique distinction between pheasants and quail, and it really will kind of differentiate how you hunt the species, because a lot of times when you're pheasant hunting, you may kick up an individual rooster. The vast majority of the roosters I've kicked up, it's one. If you're really lucky, you may kick up two at one time, but the vast majority of time, you're going to be putting up an individual rooster. Now, bobwhite, they are completely different. In the fall and winter, they are doing what we call a covey. And so it's essentially a social group of mixed gender. So there's males in there, there's females in there. And what they're essentially doing is basically creating a family unit to help survive through winter. And if you look at this picture here at the top, you can see them kind of all sitting in a circle. And so what they'll do is at night when they roost, they will basically sit on the ground in a little tiny circle and put all their butts together. And what that does is it helps them kind of thermoregulate. And so it allows them to essentially keep each other a little bit warmer. They're kind of sharing body heat. They're insulating using each other's bodies. And so it's this really interesting behavior. But when you're out quail hunting, you're largely going to kick up a covey. And so this picture here at the bottom is a really textbook example of what you're going to see when pheasant hunting. You're going to be out there and boom, you're going to flush up a covey and you're going to see just 10, 15, sometimes 20, depending on the health of that area's population in that individual covey. And what I will say, the first couple coveys that you happen to kick up, it's very, nauseating isn't really the right word, but it's hard to focus on an individual target. And a lot of times what people will do on that first covey is they end up what I call just kind of cloud shooting. They're not picking an individual target. They're just kind of seeing the cloud of birds and they're just pulling the trigger. So when you're out quail hunting, you really want to make sure when you kick up a covey, focus on an individual target. It is a lot harder than it sounds that's really one of their main predation avoidance techniques. It's kind of called, I think biologists use the term flashing or mobbing. You see a similar thing with white-tailed deer. When white-tailed deer are all running away and they all put up their butts, you see, a dozen, and it gives just that predator a split second to do this and figure out which one to go, and then he goes, and that can help those prey animals get a little bit further away. And so it's really kind of a predation avoidance, is just to confuse that predator by just seeing a lot of flashing and a lot of moving targets that they can't necessarily focus on. So just keep that in mind, just kind of a practical tip out there.
Disorienting, I think is the word you're looking
for.
Very
disorienting. Yes.
Man, it makes you want to go and shoot. If you ever got heavy duty into quail hunting, you kind of want to go clay shooting where they're shooting multiple targets off at once and making sure you
do.
Try to pick one.
Yep. And that's one of my favorite parts of like a shooting sports, Clay, is when you're getting either an on rapport pair or just a couple pair that are all going, because it really does trick your mind in a similar way. We were even out goose hunting a week or two ago, and we had a bunch of geese come in, and I could tell that first group, I did not aim like I should have. I pulled a move, and I just rookie move, and I just cloud shot. Ended up getting lucky and knocking one of them down. But then on the next group, okay, take your time, aim, and able to knock down a few more. So again, just when that first flush happens, it's exciting, but just take your time and try to focus on an individual target. But back to kind of the importance of habitat, which is kind of the topic for tonight. I really want to just emphasize how important these native warm season grasses are and how rare they are on the landscape these days. Illinois, again, was over 90% of Illinois at one time was prairie. That's kind of why we got the name Prairie State. And so you can see on the right just the distinction between a healthy looking prairie that's intermixed with wildflowers. And that's one thing I want to really emphasize too, is when I'm looking for areas to hunt, yes, I'm looking for grasslands, but a lot of times I'm looking for a healthy mix of forbs and, again, that shrubby component to be in there. I don't want just a monoculture of just big blue stem. I like to have a lot of diversity because that's going to increase the amount of animals that can utilize that space. It's going to create more cover, more food, more shelter from predation. And all in all, it's just going to increase the amount of animals that can survive in that specific area. Again, I probably should have started off this webinar kind of mentioning this, but upland birds are what we consider gallinaceous birds, or ground nesting. So a lot of times when you think of birds, you're thinking of, they're building a little nest up in a tree, whether it's, a cardinal or a hummingbird. Even eagles building nests up in trees. Pheasants, quail, as well as turkey are what we consider gallinaceous. So they're building these nests on the ground. And so that's an even more critical component of prairie grasses, is that it has that substantial grass component so that they can actually build a nest, raise that nest. And then what happens after that nest hatches? Then they go into what we call brood rearing. And that's where the structure of native warm season grasses is very important. And what the major difference between what I'm talking about in terms of native warm season grasses versus the grass that's in your or my front yard. What's in most people's yards is what we consider a cool season grass versus a native warm season grass. And so what that means is largely they're doing their growing in the cool season, where the native warm season grasses are doing the large amount of growing in the warm season, so throughout the summer. But A lot of it is due to the structure of those grasses. So native warm season grasses are what we consider a clumping grass. So you'll have a clump of grass, you'll have a clump of grass, and you'll have a clump of grass. Now, the way they grow with the vertical structure that then kind of drapes over, if you're from afar, and a lot of time from a human's perspective, it looks like just this sea of grass, kind of like what you would expect if you were to just let your lawn grow and never mow it. But in reality, think of it from a bird's eye who's sitting on the ground. It almost becomes this intricate maze between these various clumps. And a lot of times, the nice thing about these native warm season grasses is they essentially shade out any competition. And so underneath and in between those individual clumps is bare soil. And that's what especially young birds really need, is that bare soil. If you think about the size of a baby quail when it hatches, it's about the size of a bumblebee. So imagine that tiny bumblebee walking around in your front grass trying to find seeds. It's not going to be able to do that very well. But in the nature, in the native warm season grasses where it's this clump and it's basically this kind of maze going through with just bare soil, they can do that all day and find seeds no problem. And so again, not only does it provide cover and structure, but due to the clumping nature of it, it allows for good seed searching, allows for great brood rearing habitat.
Yeah, it's really like a really neat little microclimate that they grow up in.
It really is. It really is.
Yeah, it's like Honey, I Shrunk the Kid meets like any David Attenborough movie where they show like mice running around and like that whole sub.
Yeah, we need that was it the Black Mirror episode on Netflix where they have the little bee drones. I would love to see a little bee-sized thing like that just fly through the prairie maze like that and just kind of get what a baby chick would see.
Mm-hmm.
But now I want to talk about just a few of the common grasses. So we're not going to go through all the grasses. We're not going to spend too much time, but I do just want to highlight some of the really common ones that you're going to see. So arguably one of the most common, the one that most people are familiar with, and a lot of that is due to the ease of being able to identify it. And so that's big blue stem. If you care, the scientific name is Andropogon girardii, but the easiest way to be able to ID this individual species is looking at the seed head. And so if you look at this seed head, you can kind of see me circling it. It's what I like to describe it. It looks like a blue turkey's foot. It has these very kind of individual finger-like projections that come off, and that's where the individual seeds are kind of resting. But this is big blue stem, so it looks like a little turkey foot is kind of the easiest way to describe it. Now, this is a fairly tall grass. In good conditions, it can get well over 6 feet tall. But again, it is a clump-forming native warm season grass. So that's big blue stem. And now one other kind of really important component of native plants in general. And I'm actually in the process of converting a large portion of my yard to native warm season grasses. One, less mowing, but two, we've had some issues with water. And if you think about native warm season grasses, I should have put an illustration in to kind of highlight this, but native warm season grasses and a lot of native plants will send roots literally 15, 20 feet into the ground, where a lot of your cool season grasses, like what's in your yard now, maybe only shoot roots, 1.5 inches, 2 inches. And so if you think about the ability of that plant to soak up and hold a lot of water, it's night and day. So just always like to point that out. So this is another really common one. This is little blue stem. It's really indicative. It's a fairly short grass, so we're talking 12 to 24 inches, but it always usually has this color. So it's got this kind of reddish brown color. You'll see it a lot in prairies, especially along the edges. Now there is another species of grass that's called broom sedge. That's easy to get confused with this one, but broom sedge really likes a lot more acidic soil. So a lot of times you're going to see that on poor soil areas, or you're going to see it along a lot of cedar trees, things like that. But if it's a healthy prairie, chances are it's going to be a little blue stem.
Sorry to cut you off, buddy. Those root systems and the fact that we mowed them all down and started farming on top of it, is that why we have such good topsoil here? Because all the prairie that used to be here before?
That's certainly a big component. And a lot of it, too, is just the glaciation of this area as well. Right. And that's one thing that's really cool about native warm season grasses is in a lot of places, that seed is still in the soil and is still in the seed bank. And a lot of managers have started to basically just do a kill and see what naturally starts to come up. And now they'll have to do some spot treatments to kill off any, exotic invasives that'll eventually overtake the entire thing. But largely in a lot of these areas, there's still a lot of remnant prairie seeds still in the seed bank that can still be activated. And if you're ever looking for, there's very few remnant prairies in Illinois left. But a lot of times if you're near a railroad, just look. A lot of times you're going to see the coolest looking prairie that you've ever seen, and it's just right along the railroad. And that's just because it's an undisturbed area. It's never been tilled. It's never been turned over for ag production. And so you can find a lot of really cool remnant prairie plants in those areas. But this is a plant, probably the most common right next to big blue stem that I see, especially on public land sites in Illinois. This is Indian grass. And so this is a fairly tall grass. You're talking 4 or 5 feet tall, clump forming nature, just like the others. But if you look at the seed head, I like to describe it as just like an Indian paintbrush or a tail. It's pretty descriptive. Once you start seeing it, you'll start seeing it pretty much everywhere. But another really good grass, another native, reacts well to fire as well. And again, I know there's a lot more grasses that we're kind of passing over. There's side oats, ground east. There's a million different native warm season grasses out there. We're just kind of trying to give a quick snapshot. And this is another one that I see a lot. It's not the greatest for upland habitat, but a lot of private land managers have started to use this almost like a screen. And the reason is you can look at the picture here on the right. So it's a very big, very bushy native warm season grasses that while still clumps, it doesn't clump as much as big blue stem or some of the others. So a lot of times it will create this nice screen-like effect. And this is a fairly tall grass too. You're talking 6, sometimes 7 feet tall. But the textbook way to ID this is by looking at the seed head. It almost just looks like a Christmas tree. So if you think back to the big blue stem, it looked like a turkey's foot. Little blue stem, it's kind of hard to see the seed head on those. The Indian grass kind of looks like a paintbrush or a tail. And then this one looks very much like a tree. And again, this is one that a lot of, especially deer hunters, there's been a big trend in the past, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years. I've really noticed, even just watching some of the content that some of the big deer hunters put out, they're starting to outline a lot of their food plots with switchgrass. And so what that does is just adds a little bit more protection to those deer. They feel a little bit more comfortable in there because they basically got an entire wall around them, so nothing can see in there, and so they feel pretty safe. So it's a grass you'll see quite a bit out there. Again, not the best for upland, just because it can get pretty dense and pretty thick, but it's one you will definitely see.
I saw a post on that today.
Oh, did you actually?
Yeah, it was a guy talking at a podium, and he was going over his management for his deer, and he was saying that he had a 15-acre field, and he said a buck would come out. He'd have one doe and a fawn in the field, and he'd have a buck come out, scan it for 2 seconds, see the doe and a fawn there, and then do one scrape at the corner and then leave. And then he took grasses and made it into 13 sections of field.
Okay.
And he said that deer went from an average of spending 5 minutes out there to spend 45 minutes out there because he has to go and look in each one because he can't see the whole field in one go. So the buck has to go around and check each one or whatever. And then also more does and fawns would come out because they weren't kicking each other off or anything like that. So that was his method. So yeah, I literally just saw that maybe 45 minutes ago.
That's funny. But yeah, so this slide, I really just, again, want to reiterate that quail and rabbit habitat as well. I know, we're kind of talking about pheasant and quail, but rabbits are right alongside. You're going to find them in similar habitats, especially to quail. Now, obviously, their range, they're pretty much all over the entire state, where quail are pretty much kind of the southern third of Illinois. They don't really get too much further north than that. But I just really want to emphasize the importance of this kind of shrubby, brushy edge habitat that used to be rampant until we kind of developed these large scale, basically landscape level ag fields that are, a full 640 acres, a full section. We used to have these individual 40 acres all segmented with different hedgerows, different, shrubs, different grasses growing in those. That was fantastic upland habitat. And so when I'm looking at a map and trying to just figure out decent places to hunt, this is what I like to look for. I like to look for a field especially if I'm just looking at satellite imagery. I'm doing it from afar, just kind of seeing if it's even worth going out and checking out. This is what I'm looking for. I want to see a field that I kind of like to describe it. It looks like it's starting to be reclaimed by the forest. And so if you think about the natural succession of land in Illinois, if you were to just take a, let's just say a 600 a 40 acre piece of cornfield, you were to harvest the corn and then just let it go for decades, what it will do that first year, it's probably going to turn into a grassland. Over time, you're going to start to see small shrubs start to overtake, and you're going to start to see what we call woody encroachment. It's going to be your early successional species. It's going to be your maples. A lot of times you're going to see honey locust, maybe some Osage orange, depending on where you're at. And over time, it's going to eventually turn back into kind of an oak hickory forest. That's just the nature of succession. Most land wants to be in a forest. That's kind of its ultimate culmination. And so if you find areas that look like they're starting to turn back into the forest, that instantly tells me that it's probably got at least some kind of shrubby, woody vegetation component. It may not be the best. It may not be what if it was, a carefully managed parcel of ground, what it would look like. But for me, that's what I prefer to look for rather than just an entire dominant grassland field that just doesn't have any edge. It doesn't have much distinction. Now, if you look closely at this field, and I kind of pulled this one up for a very specific reason, is this is what you're going to see a lot on public land in Illinois. You can almost see like this checkerboard pattern of essentially what it is mowed strips through the fields. You'll see that on a lot of DNR lands, and what it does is it makes it a little easier for hunters to walk through. Me personally, I don't like to walk through the easy mode areas. The birds aren't going to be there. Now, if you have a great dog that can run off and go side to side and is checking all the cover for you, fantastic. You can take a nice leisurely stroll down the mode path. My dog isn't the greatest. I have to give her a lot more cues, and she likes to always come back to me after every pass. So I have to get into the thick stuff, which is where the birds are. So I just want to mention that when you see fields like this, chances are they're probably pheasant hunted. But again, just keep that in mind that yes, it may be easier walking, but chances are you're not going to flush any birds unless they're right on the edge of that, because they don't really like to be in this stuff, right? They need cover. They need that vertical structure over top. The primary predator for upland birds is going to be other birds. It's going to be your raptors, your owls. And so they really need that vertical structure of the native warm season grasses, whereas it grows up and kind of flops over. That gives them great coverage from above down below. And so a lot of times they want to be in that thick stuff. So just keep that in mind. It may be easier walking, but it may not be as productive walking. Again, we mentioned we'll kind of hit on regulations. I don't want to spend too much time on this. If you have any specific questions, feel free to drop it in the chat. We also do on our YouTube channel have a couple old webinars where we go through every single upland regulation you need to know. So if you are interested, you can just go to YouTube and look up Illinois Learn to Hunt, and you'll find all of our old webinars, and you can find one of those old upland ones that kind of where we walk through every single regulation that you need to know. But this will be your bread and butter as a hunter in Illinois. I did mention a little bit before about legal game. So again, for bobwhite quail, the gender does not matter. We can harvest male and female. We don't need to know the difference. For pheasants, it's very important. For pheasants, especially during the statewide season, what I mean by that is when we're hunting wild birds, we are only legally allowed to harvest roosters. So you want to make sure they have these vibrant colors. And again, they have a really long tail, so they're pretty easy to spot, even if they're really backlit and all you're kind of seeing is a silhouette. And also, I wish I had a good video of it, but roosters, when they flush, they are very loud. So you will instantly know the difference. They're going to cackle. They're going to basically make a vocalization as they flush and as they fly away, where the hens are going to be a lot more quiet, and they're not going to have, again, these nice colors. They're going to have a very short, kind of stubby tail. Mm-hmm. It is important to highlight site-specific regulations too as well, especially if you're on public land. Individual sites do often have differing regulations from the statewide season. So again, we just want to reiterate, always check those site-specific regulations. Now, if you're looking for a public land spot to hunt, this is kind of your best tool, and we will go through a couple other options that are a little lesser known But this is kind of what you're looking for right off the bat is huntillinois.org. They have a nice hunt map tool so you can see where every individual site is in the state. And if you click on the individual button here on the right that looks like a pheasant flying, you can click individual species and it will show you individual areas where those species can be legally hunted. And so it's a really nice way to just see from a very high level where some of these different spots are in the state. And then you can start to decide how far you're willing to travel. And then you can start doing some other research that we'll get into here in a second that can help you pinpoint specific locations. And so this is essentially what it looks like. If you click on the pheasant layer and you kind of zoom in on an individual site, you can see exactly where on that specific site that you can legally hunt pheasants. So it is pretty convenient. Now, this is a resource highly recommend. Unfortunately, the newest data that they've put out is from 2022 to 2023 season. So that's kind of the newest data that we have to work with. But essentially, this is the Illinois DNR Public Lands Hunting Report. And what this does is basically shows what has been harvested at individual sites throughout that last year. So it's a really good way, again, to get a nice snapshot and just quickly see, do they even have they ever harvested a pheasant there? If the answer is no, chances are it's not because people haven't tried. Chances are it's because either A, the habitat's not conducive, or B, there's just no birds there. And so I highly recommend checking out this public lands hunting report. It gives you a really nice snapshot. And you can see there are sites that harvest a decent amount, like Silver Springs, 1,859 pheasants. Now that happens to be a controlled pheasant program, but that's a large number of birds. Sibley, 90. That is not a controlled pheasant. Those are wild birds. Saybrook, 147. So there's some individual sites out there that do have quite a good harvest. But I really like these public lands hunting report just for getting a quick snapshot of what things are looking like out there.
Do you think 60 quail at Pyramid is a real number?
Oh yeah. Pyramid State, and that's actually lower than I would have guessed. They have a pretty good quail population out there. It's probably, in terms of just like public land, it's probably one of the better ones in the state for quail.
Sure.
Now
Yeah,
the challenge is it's a big piece. It's like 20 something thousand acres, I think.
Yeah, I've seen the map of it. It's huge. Yeah.
And we did have a question, any that I just want to ask or answer real quick. Any gear considerations for walking through the tougher pass? That's a fantastic question. And yes. Mm-hmm. So there's a couple different schools of thought. One, don't wear jeans. Those, because yes, grasses, they'll brush right off. These are not just grass areas. They're going to be dominated with rubus, with blackberry, with briar. And so you're going to be getting poked. You're going to be getting stuck. So what a lot of upland hunters wear is basically upland pants. Personally, I kind of made the investment and bought a pair of chaps. And the nice thing I like about the chaps is I can wear them whether it's hot or whether it's minus 10 degrees and I have to wear a couple layers underneath those chaps, or if I can just wear a really light pant under those chaps if it's 60 or 70 degrees out. And so I personally really like the chaps just because they give me complete protection, but it's basically a one purchase rather than having to buy 3 or 4 different pants that have different types of insulation or stuff like that. So personally, I just bought Orvis chaps. You don't have to go that brand. There's plenty of other brands out there, but I personally really like the chaps just because, again, it allows me to tailor my base layer to whatever the weather is. And now I only have to have one pair of upland pants that I can wear no matter what the conditions are. I can throw those in the car and I'm good to go. Mm-hmm. I don't know, Jason, if you have any thoughts.
I was going to ask what your opinion on wearing. I think in the past I've worn, just because it's been cold out whenever I've gone, but having a pair of gloves on, at least a light glove, is nice because whenever I take it off and then I walk a couple feet, I always brush my hand against the picker anyway. So
Really so I'm the type, I like to be able to touch my trigger finger with a bare finger. So I actually wear fingerless gloves that give pretty good protection over the entire wrist, but my fingertips are still exposed, which allows me to still work the dog stuff, work my phone if I'm using it for a GPS to track the dog or whatever.
Yeah, I would suggest that as well for sure. Yeah, so covering up any skin that you have that could be exposed is going to get snagged on something, because even if you think you're just going to walk from just to get out of the patch, and you take your glove off because it's hot.
Right, right.
You give it 2-3 steps, and you're going to scratch your hand on something.
And again, we are wearing blaze orange.
Mm.
So I have a nice little, it happens to be like a vest slash backpack kind of thing, but it's, made for upland hunting. It's blaze orange. It's got a gear bag. You can go as high end as you want. You can spend like $500 on some of these upland vests, or I've harvested a lot of birds in my life with a $10 Walmart vest that is legal. It fits. You throw it over whatever you're wearing, throw on an orange cap, and you're good to go.
Mm.
The big thing to keep in mind when we're talking about blaze orange, now in Illinois you can also use blaze pink. They passed that for whatever reason. They think women aren't hunting because they can't wear pink, so I guess they thought that would do it. Whatever. But it cannot be broken. And what I mean by that is if you go to the store, you'll see a lot of what I call blaze camo. So it'll be blaze orange, but it'll be embedded with like a silhouette camo pattern. That is not legal in Illinois. There are some states that is considered legal. In Illinois, that would not suffice as your blaze orange. So make sure it's a complete solid. You need 400 square inches of a vest and then a cap, whether it's a baseball cap or a beanie, stocking cap, whatever fits kind of the weather for me.
Yeah, and you're going to need it if you go walking into some of those, especially the big blue stem. I mean, I've seen deer walk into that and disappear. A person can walk right into
Oh,
that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
friend at all. So it's you're like, I'm walking.
And again, these birds, they can see color. They can see color really well, but they're not looking up, right? They're not looking for you. When they flush, they're hearing you more so than they're seeing you, and they're certainly not seeing that blaze orange. So yeah, definitely check out those public lands hunting report. Here's another really just a banger of an idea, and the reason I'm really highlighting it is the application opens just in a few weeks. So this is the Illinois Recreational Access Program. So if you've never heard of this program, it's one of those that it's been around since looks like 2011, but it's one of those programs that not a lot of people know about. And I'm not really necessarily sure why, but essentially what it is DNR's way of increasing public land in Illinois. And so essentially what this is leasing land from private landowners and opening it up to the public to hunt, to fish. And there's some other recreational opportunities. Some of them I think you can camp, some of them you can hike, things like that. But there are upland hunting sites. And the IRAP upland application opens October 4th. So keep that in mind. If you're brand new to upland hunting, you will get even increased odds during that application. The easiest way to find information for the IRAP program is to just Google Illinois Recreational Access Program. The DNR's website oftentimes can be hard to navigate and to find things. So I find it easier to just Google Illinois Recreational Access Program, and it will pull you up that website. Once you open up that website, it'll have a list of, do you want a deer hunt? Do you want a turkey hunt? Do you want an upland hunt? Click the upland hunt, and then it'll open a new page that details the entire process, the entire application process. It'll show you where those sites are located so you can decide if it's even within your what you're willing to travel.
They usually go by county. I want to say they tell you the county at least because
because they won't show you the individual site. Yeah. Correct. It'll be at the county level. Yeah.
They don't want to blow up the person's house. So not blow up as in like make it popular for people to go drive by and start scouting a land they might not even get in a lottery type of thing. You know what I mean?
And I'll tell you what, I've never drawn an IRAP upland permit, but I did. My wife drew an IRAP deer permit, I don't know, 3 years ago or so. But I was a little nervous. What's this process going to look like? Am I going to get out there and have issues with the landowner? No, they have it set up so you never interact with the landowner. You will get basically a full manila envelope in the mail that it's got more information than probably you're going to want, but it's got maps that have arrows. You park here. You can only park here. You get this entire parcel. And the cool thing is you essentially get that entire property to yourself for the duration of that hunt. So nobody else can be out there. It's basically a little private hunting spot for you. So definitely check out the Illinois Recreational Access Program. Even if you don't use it for upland, look into it for deer, for waterfowl, for fur bear hunting, whether you want a raccoon or coyote hunt, if you want to trap, if you want to fish. They have some river properties where you can actually just go fish right on the riverbank. So definitely check it out. Mm-hmm. And another one I wanted to mention is the Pheasants Forever Fields. So this application is currently open, and I believe it closes at the end of this month. So if you're interested, go to ihuntil.com. That's Pheasants Forever, their Illinois chapter's website. And if you just scroll down on the main page, you'll find information about the Pheasants Forever fields. Now, you can just hunt this site, but for the first 2 weeks of the season, it is lottery. So if you want to be out there, one of the first couple hunts, which those are probably the better hunts of the entire year, just because the population is going to be at its highest before people start killing birds. They're not really privy to hunters yet. They haven't noticed pressure. So definitely check that out. Submit an application. It's a free lottery, so you kind of might as well not. And you can submit a lottery for each individual date that's available. So I think, Jason, you said that's up to 4. I think, is that correct?
There's 4 dates available. Yeah, Saturday and Sunday for the first 2 weeks. Yep.
And then after that, then it just opens up to basically public access, where you can just go through and get a windshield card, which is just something you put in your windshield, and then you can just go hunt it. So definitely check it out. Those are the Pheasants Forever fields.
And I mean, even if you don't get the lottery, I mean, that's a great resource. I mean, that's only 4 days people are hunting, and I mean, people are good. Your limits are 2 birds. There's still going to be a lot of birds out there. That's a great resource if you want to go there afterwards and try to walk in.
And when we were at Illinois Deer and Beer Fest a few weeks ago, we ran into one of a former participant, Aaron, and he has been hunting it quite a bit with his dog. He hunted it several times last year through the walk-in season, so not even one of the lottery hunts. And he said he had a lot of success. He put up a lot of birds, basically limited out, it sounded like, every time he was there, as well as just saw a lot of birds. And I know there also is some waterfowl hunting at that site too, so definitely check it out.
Cool.
Just wanted to pass along another opportunity. Now this, we haven't really focused too much on safety. We've really been focused on where to hunt, what the habitat looks like, what we're looking for as upland hunters when we're trying to find a spot. But I think it really is important to just at least emphasize the safety aspect of things. We did just mention the importance of wearing your blaze orange, both that vest as well as the cap, the entire time you're hunting. Even if you have somebody who's just walking along, they're not hunting, they're just with you, they need to be in blaze orange. But it's important to understand your zones of fire, especially because a lot of times, and this is why I love upland hunting so much, it's probably my favorite out of all the hunting. It's because I get to hunt with friends or with family. Deer hunting, I love deer hunting. As you can see, I've got deer on the wall everywhere. But it gets boring after a while. I get a couple weeks and then I'm like, you know what? I want to talk. I'm a talker, as you can probably tell just from sitting in this webinar. I like to talk. That's the nice thing about upland hunting, is you get 4 or 5 of your friends or family together. You just get in a straight line and you literally just walk the field. But when you're doing that, it's important to know what your individual zone of fire is in front of you. My rule of thumb, especially if I'm hunting with a dog, my zone of fire is basically a piece of pie, or a slice of pie, a slice of pizza in front of me. That's my zone of fire. Now, if you're on the very left of the line, they can have a little bit more swing. And if they're on the very right of the line, they can have a little bit more swing. But when I'm on a line, and this is where everybody's a little bit different, I do not, especially if it's my dog, I do not let anybody shoot if the bird flies over. Sometimes you'll flush a bird, and instead of it flying away from you, it'll fly to you, and it may flush, 5 feet in front of you and then be soaring over your head. What I don't want to see on that line is a bunch of people going like this. And what are you doing? You're instantly swinging that gun right over somebody's head or right at their head. And so for me, if a bird flies over the line, I call no bird, no bird. There's going to be more birds out there. Mm-hmm. It's okay. And another, especially with the dogs I have, so I have golden retrievers. Most people probably don't even think they're a decent upland breed. They can be, and they are, but they act differently than a lot of upland dogs. And so if you join us for the next webinar in this series, we'll dive really deep into this concept and how to hunt with a dog, how to hunt without a dog. But when you're hunting, especially with a flushing dog, so this is a dog that we have 2 groups of dogs in reality. We have pointers and we have flushers. So you have your pointers, like your German short hair pointer, your English pointer. When they find a pheasant, their job is to hold that pheasant. So they're trained to be able to lock onto that bird and keep that bird in that spot until the handler gets up, and then the handler can either send the dog to flush the bird, or a lot of times the dog will stay put and the hunter will walk right by the dog and flush that bird. My dogs are trained as flushers. And so what they do If they smell a bird, their entire job is to get that bird in the air as quick as possible. So there's a lot of times not an indication. Now, as you start to hunt with your dog, you'll start to notice what we call they get birdie, and you'll start to say, okay, that dog is on scent. Its tail will start acting a little bit different. Its body language will change. And so you get a little indication. But again, you're not getting that hard point where then you get time to prepare, to walk up, get ready. Okay, let's go flush. No, it's just chaos. That bird's gone, and that dog is instantly behind that bird. Because again, what's his job? That dog thinks my job is to get the bird. And so a lot of times it will jump up at that bird. And so with a flushing dog, I like to always, and it's probably in reality just a good rule of thumb for every upland hunting. I want to see blue sky beneath the belly of that bird. And what that tells me is that bird is high enough in the horizon that even if my dog is out front, there's no chance that I can harm my dog. And so I like to see blue sky beneath the belly. And now we talked, about the lack of habitat in Illinois, the lack of opportunity for pheasant and quail. There is a lottery that has already since passed for this year, but just in future years, it's basically July and August. There's a free upland application where you can submit an application to get a pheasant permit for an individual site. I will just go ahead and refer you back to those Illinois Public Lands Hunting Report. If you do submit an application, I'll tell you, the first 3 years I submitted an application, I drew a permit for a site that has never had a pheasant harvested on that site. I didn't know that. I just thought, oh, that site's 45 minutes from my house. I'll throw an application there. Why not? Went out there and yeah. What's that? Yeah. So just check those public lands hunting reports so you can get a nice snapshot and see if that's a site that's even worth applying for. But again, that lottery has already passed for this year. But don't fret. Again, there's a lot of walk-in opportunities too, where you can just go to an individual site and just go hunt. Again, check those public lands hunting reports, and that'll give you a good idea of what sites hold birds versus what sites don't. So keep that in mind. But another opportunity that I always like to highlight, we always get a ton of questions about what this process looks like. How does it work? It's the controlled pheasant hunting program. So this is a state-run program. This is through the Illinois DNR. Now, again, Jason and I are not with the DNR. We're with the university, but this is a DNR-run program, the controlled pheasant hunting program. It's a great opportunity to get a field. You are going to see birds. If you just want to get out and get a chance at upland hunting and experiencing it and trying it, this in reality is probably the best place to start. It does have differing regulations from the statewide season, which again makes it, in my opinion, pretty approachable, especially for a new hunter. And so you can see there's quite a few sites across the state. I've actually hunted probably half of these throughout the years. It's a lot of fun. Again, you are harvesting raised birds. So these are birds that are raised and then they are released out on the landscape for you to go hunt. So it provides an opportunity to pheasant hunt in areas that pheasants just wouldn't be at anymore, just due to habitat loss. Now, the nice thing is you can do the entire process online. So there is an application where if you're wanting one of the sites like Jim Edgar Panther Creek, a lot of those sites fill up pretty quick on a day-to-day basis. So for some of those, you may actually have to apply. But there are a lot of sites that you can literally just get on the website 2 days. Make sure you do it 2 days before you want to go hunt, and you can reserve a spot online, pay the $34 if you're a resident, $39 if you're a non-resident, and that allows you to harvest 2 birds. So you're essentially paying $34 for 2 birds. But again, it's a great opportunity. There also is a disabled controlled pheasant hunting program as well as a youth controlled pheasant hunting program. Regulations are pretty similar. The pricing does change drastically. I think the disabled, I don't quote me on this, but I think the disabled and youth are virtually free. If not, they're very, very, very inexpensive. But again, a great option to get out in the field. And so this is kind of what that application looks like. And so just a quick show, you'll just enter your DNR customer number. So that's going to be the number that's on the top of your hunting license, your fishing license. Enter a phone number. an email address, and then you'll select an area and you'll pick a date. And now if you notice this view quota calendar at the top, I highly recommend clicking that, because that shows you exactly what dates are available, how many permits have already been, let's say, purchased for that individual date, for that individual site, and how many are left. And so you can see at this individual site, this happens to be Des Plaines State Fish and Wildlife Area, which is up north, kind of in, I think it's Will County. That sounds right. And you can see they pretty much allow 215 hunters or so every day they hunt. Now, a lot of these sites do have what we consider rest days, so they're not hunting every single day. They may only hunt 3 or 4 days out of the year, or out of the week. But just gives you a really good snapshot, so you can see how many days are still available. You can see like December 14th, there's still 207. December 21st, 214. Now, as you get closer and closer to a holiday, that's when those start to go pretty quick. Especially upland hunting, like I mentioned earlier, it's very social. You want to do it with your friends, with your family. So a lot of times you'll see, especially if you want to do it around the holidays, you probably kind of want to start planning and maybe reserving your spots now if you want to be around Thanksgiving or around Christmas, so you can hunt with some people, who are coming in from out of town or something like that, because those often do fill up a little bit quicker just because they're near that holiday season. So again, you'll check out that quota calendar, and I'm just going to walk you through this entire controlled pheasant process, what it looks like. So again, you'll kind of purchase your spot online, pay that $34, and of course there is a stupid credit card fee. So I think that adds like an extra dollar or two. Yeah, nice. So yeah, so the way it works is you'll reserve your spot again 2 days in advance before you hunt. Now, prior to COVID, they used to have what we call a standby line. And the only reason I want to say it is because it's bitten me in the butt a few times. Historically, you could, again, pre-COVID, you could just show up that day, pay the fee in cash, and get a spot as long as there were spots still available. Ever since COVID, when they had to basically not allow people to be in line or be together in any way, shape, or form, they basically got rid of that process, and they've transitioned it all to online. So if you're used to doing it that way, just a quick reminder, you can no longer do it that way. Everything has to be done online 2 days in advance. Now, the big benefit that gives us as hunters is they dictate how many birds they put out based on the number of hunters that have reserved a spot. I don't know what the ratio is, if it's 4 birds per hunter. 5, I have no clue, no idea. But I do know that number dictates. And so historically, they used to run into a lot of issues where, maybe they only had 5 people reserve online, but then they'd have 80 show up that morning and put cash, but they only put out their ratio for 5 hunters. And so it left a lot of people without ever seeing birds. So it does give us a little bit more reliability that you're going to see birds. So again, you'll register online, pay in advance, 2 days in advance. It'll give you a little certificate. I don't want to say a license because it's not a license, but a little receipt type document. Print that off or bring it on your phone with you. When you get to that individual site, normally you'll have to get there before 8 o'clock. I like to get there a little early. The earlier you're there, the better option you have for selecting a field. And so the way it works is basically a first come, first serve. They'll have a list that has the entire site broken out into individual fields, and whoever's there first, they get first choice of field. Second person, they get second choice. And it'll just continue going until all the fields are filled up. And you can certainly piggyback. Like if Jason and I aren't together, but he happens to get there before me and he hunts field 10, I also want to hunt field 10, I can do that too. But a lot of times you'll see people just naturally pick a field that doesn't have people at, just to spread people out a little bit. But again, don't freak out if there are other people hunting in your field. I'll kind of talk about that in a second. But you'll get there, you'll sign in, you'll pick your field, you'll receive a back patch, which basically is just, you can think, it almost looks like a marathon number. So if you think back, if you ever ran a 5K or a 10K, you have a little backpack with just a number. You'll attach that to your vest. And all that does is lets everybody know who's driving by, whether it's a conservation officer, whether it's site staff. Yep, that's a controlled pheasant hunter. They're allowed to be there. They're supposed to be there, and they won't even bother you. So you'll get a back patch. And then a lot of times they will have a safety meeting. Usually they'll have a designated time. And when you check in, they'll say, make sure to be back here at 8:30. or whatever time that safety briefing is. And then you can go to sit in your car, eat breakfast, go grab a cup of coffee, whatever you want to do. Just be back for that safety meeting. It's usually like a 5 to 10 minute thing where he's just going to get up there, talk a little bit about safety, talk a little bit about the rules, talk about the checkout process after you're done hunting. Because again, these are not wild birds. And so you need to mark them as a controlled pheasant. Otherwise, when you're leaving, let's say you harvested 2 hens, which on a controlled pheasant, you can harvest female roosters. You can harvest female pheasants. If a conservation officer just happens to pull you over, happens to see you driving, and he asks, "Hey, were you out hunting?" "Yeah, I got two hens." Well, he doesn't know that you didn't shoot wild hens. And so before you leave, there is a checkout process where you will get a tag that literally it's just a sticker that you just attach to the leg of that carcass. And it just lets anybody know that this is a bird harvested at a controlled pheasant site. This is not a wild bird. And so it has a different set of regulations because, again, you are allowed to shoot either a male or a female. Good question. What's the viability of upland bird hunting without a dog or dogs? Two schools of thought. There's a lot of people who say it is not worth it to hunt without a dog. I will say they're full of it. You can have a lot of fun, a lot of success hunting without a dog. I did it for decades. Well, not decade, a decade and a half. I had a ton of the hardest part about hunting without a dog is not finding birds, it's not flushing birds, it's recovering birds. You will get better at it. My main tip is the second you shoot a bird and it falls, instantly mark some kind of visual cue of where that bird fell. Because again, we're in a big prairie, and so that's arguably the hardest part is recovering that bird after you shot if you don't have a dog. Now, the nice thing about a lot of the controlled pheasant hunting areas, as well as some of the DNR sites, I'll actually go back to this slide because this happens to be a controlled pheasant area right here. So this is actually from Des Plaines State Fish and Wildlife Area. And so again, a lot of these, they're not trying to create the best prairie habitat that they can. They're trying to make it conducive for hunters. And so a lot of times at a lot of the DNR sites, you can see the amount of mowed paths through here. A lot of times these are going to be fairly short prairie grasses compared to what you may see if you go out to like North Dakota or Kansas, where they're just pheasant numbers are just insane. So a lot of times it can be a little easier in Illinois just because of the shorter grass. But that will by far is the most difficult aspect of it is recovering that bird after you harvest. Now, what I will say, and I did this for many years, especially when I first moved to Illinois, I really didn't know any upland hunters. I didn't have a dog at that point. I knew this controlled pheasant hunting program existed. So I just went. And the nice thing is pheasant hunters, especially pheasant hunters with well-trained dogs, there is nothing that they love more in life than being able to have somebody else hunt over their dog, because they will sit there and show off their dog. They'll talk about it the entire time. And so in a lot of cases, if you go to one of these controlled pheasant hunting programs and you just kind of mingle, again, a lot of it depends how social you are and how comfortable you are with that. But there was many times where I didn't have a dog, but I easily piggybacked off of somebody else, and they just added me right in their line. So they may have went from 3 shooters to 4 shooters. And what that does is it allows them to get a little bit more experience with their dog. It gets them, more time in the field because it takes longer for 4 people to get a limit than 3 people. And a lot of times, especially with pheasant hunting, a lot of pheasant hunters aren't so focused on the harvest. It's more the process. It's being able to run their dogs. It's being able to watch their dogs. It's hanging out with their friends. And so in a lot of cases, especially through the controlled program, you can probably find somebody day of when you're out there, hey, can I just come with you and hunt next to you guys? So that's worth a shot too. But again, don't be scared to hunt without a dog. A dog will certainly make it easier. It'll make the recovery a lot easier, but it certainly can be done. So a big tip again is when you take that shot, make a mental note. A lot of times what I'll do is I will actually pull out my phone. I do this with deer a lot too when I'm in a tree stand, and I'll point. I'll take my finger okay, I saw that bird fly here, and I will literally take a picture on my phone, because the second you move, everything looks different, and you'll be like, wasn't there like a cedar tree? What? And so just having that visual reference can go a long way. But that's by far the hardest aspect of hunting without a dog, is just finding and recovering that bird. But it's not impossible. Yeah, we do that a lot. Especially like Jason and I, we went out, I don't know, a couple years ago with both of our dogs, and we shot one, and it fell into the water. So that my dog, it was cold. They wanted no part of it, and so it was very much Jason stood where we were when we shot, and he basically just directed me. He said, "Go 5 steps to the right, walk 10 forward, and boom, found it." And so that great tip, Jason. Yeah, and there are times where I will avoid taking a shot, because I know that recovering, like especially if we're in an area that's full of Phragmites, which if you're not familiar with that, you've seen it along the interstate. Anytime there's a wet area, it's this grassy like plant that gets like 10 feet tall, has this white bushy kind of seed head on top of it, nasty stuff. But there's plenty of times where a pheasant will be flying right over that stuff, and I will just let that sucker go, because there's no chance my dog or me is going to find it. So that can be another tip, is just choose your shots wisely to make sure you're shooting it in an area. I mean, in reality, it's just as difficult as dove hunting. A lot of dove hunters don't hunt without dogs, or a lot of dove hunters hunt without dogs. Vast majority of them. There's very few people that dove hunt with dogs. Doves are freaking hard to find. They're gray, they're cryptic. You're normally in a similar habitat, prairie, sunflowers, things like that. They're hard to find. So just again, mental notes. Yeah. But yeah, so you'll go through that. No, go ahead. Yeah. But yeah, so you'll go through your safety meeting, and at that point, they will then release you to go to your field. Now, normally there will be a designated start time at all of the sites I've been to. It's 9 o'clock. I can't say that that doesn't differ from any of the others, but again, they'll tell you that at the safety meeting. So you can head to your field and basically just get everything ready. Don't load your shotgun until that clock hits 9 o'clock, and at that point, then you can start going into your field. The vast majority of the sites, again, all the ones I've been to, require you to stay at your assigned field for the first hour. After that first hour, they then allow you to, okay, I didn't kill my limit, or maybe I well, not shooting good today. I still have 2 bird limit left. I haven't shot a single one. After that first hour, then you can go to another field and try. And a lot of times, there may be hunters who've gone through a field. These birds are running everywhere, especially the controlled birds. A lot of times they prefer to run, a lot of times more so than fly. And so a lot of times, just because a hunter's already walked through an area, that does not mean there's no birds there. They could have ran right by them. They could have, their dog maybe just isn't as good, or maybe they don't have a dog, they just missed them. There's plenty of birds left out there. So just because somebody hunted a field doesn't mean that it's completely washed and there's no sense in going for it again. So definitely, if you still have another bird or two to harvest after that first hour, go check out another field, see how productive that is. At the conclusion of your hunt, like I said, they'll discuss this at the safety briefing, but they will have some kind of checkout station, whether it's a little kiosk that looks like a little outhouse type thing with a log and then some stickers for you to attach to your harvested birds. That's really all you have to do. There will be a little book that'll have your name. It's basically what you signed in with. It'll have your name, your field, and you just write what time you're leaving, how many birds you shot, and then you'll take off your backpack patch and put it in a little bag, and then you're basically ready to go. And again, just make sure to grab those preserve tags. And again, it's just a sticker that you're attaching to the leg. So again, the controlled pheasant program, it's not for everybody. There's some people that have some ethical issues with it. But again, if you want to upland hunt in Illinois, especially as a starting point, it's a great opportunity. It's easy. I don't want to say it's easy, but it's easy opportunity, as opposed to having to go through a lottery. So I have like 6 or 7 really close friends in Illinois that all upland hunt. All of us put in for a free upland permit. I don't know a single person who drew this year. So it's just tough. So if you really want to get into upland hunting in Illinois, you're either going to have to put in the work of trying to find private land access. You're going to have to put in the work of finding a really good walk-in area, or go through the controlled pheasant program. So for me, again, I like to deer hunt, I like to duck hunt, but I love to upland hunt. So I do the controlled pheasant. Just it gives me some opportunity throughout the year that if it didn't exist, I would not have opportunity. For me, yeah, for me, it's all wind, and so we'll get really into that into the next iteration of this webinar. I forget the date offhand, but it's on our schedule. So if you're interested, we go through a lot more of the practical, how to walk through a field, that kind of thing, how to stage, how to block, set up blockers so you force the birds to flush instead of run. But a lot of it is dictated by the wind direction. Just like deer hunting, we're always paying attention to the wind, just like birds. They basically have to fly into the wind, especially to first get up. Right? So that's how they're creating their lift. If they're flying with the wind, it's very hard for them to get up. So a lot of times what they'll do is fly into the wind or fly against the wind, turn, and then fly with the wind. And so a lot of times for me, I want that wind so that basically they're flying directly at me for that first flush. Right? So a lot of times I personally want the wind in my face. And so that does two things. One, forces the birds to flush this way. But two, again, they can't smell, so you're not worried about your scent, but you are worried about a little bit of noise. And it's not really talking that's the issue. It's, do you sound like a predator sneaking through the wood, through the grass? That's what they're listening for. And so if that wind is just blowing straight from you to them, that's carrying your basically your sound with them from you to them. Another thing is the way the dogs work. My dog is trained to basically, she wants the wind in her nose. And so I want the wind in my face. So she's circling and she's going to do figure eights kind of right in front of me. And as she's doing that, she's going to quarter into the wind. And with that wind, it's pulling all that scent from way down in the field. And the hope is that then she picks up on just a minute amount of scent molecule that then she can start to, where was that at? And then start to really follow that scent trail. And so for me, the first thing I'm always looking for is the wind. I personally, there's some hunters who like to have the wind at their back. Not for me. I want it in my face. It helps my dog smell. Again, makes the birds flush the way I want them to flush. So wind is kind of always step one. Two is habitat, but again, a lot of these areas, the habitat is so consistent across each field. They're pretty much all fairly similar. So I'm not really, again, it's important, but for selecting an individual field, and a lot of times, so it first wind, two, what's the habitat like? Again, just does it have some prairie? Does it look somewhat decent? And three, I personally like a field that's adjacent to other fields. There are some fields that you'll see where it'll just be a field surrounded by timber. I personally like a field that's next to other fields because I don't really like to, after that first hour, like get in my car and have to drive, have to load up the dog, unload it. It's a pain. So I personally like to just be able to go from field to field to field to field. And what I also find is pheasants, the more they're a lot like doves kind of, where it's almost advantageous to have more hunters out there because it just keeps the birds moving. If the birds can just find a spot where they're not getting disturbed, they will just sit there, hunker down, and they're not going to move. But if you're near other hunted fields, it can keep those birds moving, keep them on the wing a little bit. Maybe they're running around instead of flying, and then maybe you get a chance at a bird that guy spooked your way, that kind of thing. It works. So we got a couple more questions. We'll answer these and then we'll kind of wrap up. One is, will the Hunting with Dogs webinar touch on training? Yes. Also, if you're really interested in learning more about upland hunting or training dogs, we actually have a big event coming up. I don't know where you're at in the state, but Illinois Hunt Camp, which actually happens to be next Saturday. And we have a really well-known dog trainer who's going to come out. He's going to be there the entire event with basically an entire area set up where he's going to do dog demonstrations. He's going to answer any questions you have. His name is Matt Mercero. So if you're interested in that event, in addition to, already got your ticket. Well, perfect. So make sure to go stop by Matt. He's a fantastic dog trainer. I've learned a lot just talking with him through the years. One of our friends and colleague, Curtis, actually sent his dog up to be trained with him last fall, I think. So yeah, and again, just asking him questions. I've bought so many books on training dogs, and I had so many I don't want to say like misconceptions, but everybody's got a certain way of doing things. And I'm big on positive reinforcement with dogs. I feel like that's for me that's the way I want to train my dog. Because again, they're like my family member too, right? They live in my house. They're really close to me. So I really like that positive reinforcement. That's one thing Matt really likes to do. So make sure you chat with him. But yes, we will dive into a lot of that in that next webinar. And we did get a question about ammo selection and kind of touch on flushing distance. That's a really good question. So what I want to say right off the bat is patience. You will have more time than you think when you flush pheasants. When I first started getting into pheasant hunting, I was very cognizant of, oh my gosh, a bird's flushing. I have to get up and shoot that within, a millisecond. You have to be so quick. Pheasant, now quail are fast. Quail are small, they're tiny, they're fast. Pheasants are fat, they're big, and they're slow. And they are fairly fragile by nature. So birds obviously have just the way they've evolved for flight. They have very thin skin, they have pneumatized bones, which means they're basically hollow. And so they're very delicate animals. And so you don't need a ton of energy and impact to really drop a pheasant. And again, patience. So a lot of times those pheasants, my ideal shot is 20 to 30 yards. I don't want them much closer than that. Otherwise, I'm going to destroy the entire carcass. There's not going to be a ton of meat left. I like them to be able to get out a little bit. And if you think about the way a shotgun shoots, so we're basically shooting a shot cloud. And so you have basically a ball of shot. As it leaves, it's starting to get further and further. If you're taking a shot at a pheasant when it's 5 yards, right as it flushes, you're rushing, boom. You're basically shooting almost a single projectile and trying to hit a flying target with a thing without sights. Pretty difficult. So if you let that target get 15, 20 yards away, it's going to allow your shot spread to get a lot bigger. It's going to be, in my opinion, a much safer shot because the way pheasants flush, they're going to slowly climb. And so those first few flushes, they're going to be low and then they're going to elevate. That first few, don't shoot, let them elevate, let them get a little bit far away, that 15 to 30, anywhere in there. Now, I will say, if you're hunting wild birds, they're going to flush a lot different than the controlled pheasant birds. Controlled pheasant birds, you can, a lot of time, there's some birds you'll find on DNR sites that they don't want to flush. You'll see them like sitting on the ground and you're like, okay, you're gonna do anything? You're gonna fly? To where you may have to like actually scare the thing to get it to fly. Where a wild bird, they may be flushing 50, 70 yards away from you. Ideally, you want to get them closer than that. Now, personally, for me, I like an improved cylinder choke. That's kind of my ideal. There are some people who will use a full, especially if they're hunting a lot of wild birds out in like North Dakota, Kansas, where they may be flushing birds 40 yards out. I haven't found that necessary. I like the improved cylinder. It gives me great medium range opportunities anywhere from 15 to 30 yards or so. And personally, I like a shot 6. That's kind of my ideal. For me, has enough energy, but is because you can go bigger shot size, but then you're getting less individual pellets. And I want to have a nice mix of big BBs, but a lot of them. So, and again, we'll dive into that a lot more in the next one as well. For me, steel. Yeah, I like steel. Yep, good point. Good point. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us again. Hopefully, we'll see you at Illinois Hunt Camp in a week, and hopefully, we'll see you at the next Upland Hunting webinar. Thanks for joining us, and have a wonderful evening. Bye.